All right. What's happening, everybody? We're back. Acquire and operate. Micro SaaS. We are a crew acquiring and operating micro SaaS companies, and we're doing so in public, ideally to inspire folks to pursue this as a path, and mainly to keep ourselves sane and do so with a verifiable record, right? So I think you can only understand something if you articulate it. So these are useful for us nonetheless. But today, jumping in, we've kind of done away with the issues because that was confusing everybody. How many issue 18s can there be? So we are picking things up after last week's deal teardown with an OKR teardown today. This is Kale, by the way. What's up? And I'm riding dirty with K. Lou. Kev, how you feeling, buddy?
I'm feeling really good. What's up, everyone? Sorry I couldn't be with y'all last week, but I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, they're like, thank God I don't have to listen to this maniac talk to himself. All right, beautiful. So OKR, let's jump in. We'll take a quick look. I'm going to share my screen for the watchers, and we will jump up in it. All right, so OKR, for those, hopefully everybody's familiar with OKRs as a concept generally, and if you're not, you become familiar if you've been following along with us for a little bit. But objective and key results, this is like one of the OG, most enduring frameworks for goal setting. And so we always start in terms of a quick table of contents here. We're going to talk about this specific objective and key results, which, by the way, I should mention the objective here, I guess the abbreviated version is implementing segment-based onboarding to improve conversions. And obviously we'll elaborate on that. But we're going to start, sorry, I'm bouncing around everywhere. We're going to start with a description of the objective and then a detail of the key results that foot to that objective. So how are we thinking about the outcome? How are we thinking about kind of the outcomes that lead to that outcomes, right? How are we chaining together activities to achieve results? And then we will lean into some select commentary on key results. So depending on the time in the quarter, it's probably going to index more towards like prerequisites, or how we're thinking about kind of getting there, or what required us to get here, so that everybody's clear on that context. And then as we get further into the quarter, it's going to be much more of a traction to date, what we've learned along the way. So let's jump in. The objective is to implement, this is the long version, is to implement a segment-based and product-native onboarding experience to set the foundation for improved trial-to-paid conversions. And right now, our trailing 30-day base rate for trial-to-paid conversions is 7.41%. And Kyle Poirier just did some, he works over at OpenView. He has insane content. Definitely, I would suggest subscribing to his Growth Unhinged Substack. But he put together some extraordinary base rates. And for comparables, 20% conversion rates is good, right? So we want to be seeing, if 100 people sign up for a trial, 20 become paying users. So we've got our work cut out for us. We've seen really strong improvement in the last trailing. So I think our trailing 12-month average, which is before we took stewardship of the business. We've only been at it for 3 quarters, but I think it was closer to like 5%, which is beep. All right. Anything to add to the objective itself, Kayla?
Nothing to add. Just we definitely have our work cut out for us. I mean, we've damn near almost doubled the base rate from once we took the business, but still not there at the 20% mark. So
totally. And we've spoken a lot about thinking about funnels, and it's basically like you can push more water through the funnel, or you can make the funnel wider so that more of the water pushed in makes it to the end. So this is very much a function of expanding the pipeline, making it wider so that more water flows through to the good side. All right. So in the simplest sense, we need to create an onboarding experience flowchart. We then need to translate that to wireframes or designs. Figma is our tooling of choice there. Then we need to execute engineering. We need to QA on an iterative, or we need to quality assure and test on an iterative basis. Then we need to introduce once the design is baked, the engineering is moving forward, then we can start to layer in the video content, 4 times more engaging video content than static stuff. So we want to make sure that we're appealing, and especially the audience for this SaaS is very visual. So we need to be considerate there. And then we launch and monitor this new glorious onboarding experience. And then, of course, we collect and analyze user feedback. So, I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. I'm not sure how useful it is to elaborate that much on the key results. There's a lot of detail here. I think what is interesting in I guess a vector that we've started to employ, or a way to look. Sorry, I use so many silly words that just confuse people. So, um, a simple thing that we want to consider every time we're shaping an OKR is what are the collaboration points and what are the decision points. I think that's rigor that we've recently added, and it's been very useful because we've missed on OKRs before, because I don't think we were as attentive to the collaboration points. And it's like, ooh, and collaboration points are and decision points. This is all, I guess, just kind of a level of detail below the fact that these are like choke points. These are areas of the OKR that can come to a screeching halt. So we want to be super thoughtful there. So let's just elaborate on these KRs through that lens. I think that's useful. So when you're creating an onboarding experience flowchart, you want to work with customer success or whoever has the most intimate knowledge with the actual product and the steps, the tasks, the things that you're asking of users to make progress in the application. So this could be selecting what's applicable to you, selecting integration points, Gmail, calendar, etc., customizing workflows. There's a lot of stuff that's relevant here. So you want to work with customer success to identify what are all the tasks that exist now, and then as we'll elaborate on when we get to it, and how do we shift or kind of whittle that down to the least amount of steps possible, because you want onboarding to be, you want your user to achieve time to value is the North Star metric. So we'll elaborate on that a little bit more as well. But this is a collaboration between customer success and design. And then once you move on to building onboarding wireframes, now you're pulling in engineering. Or I'm sorry, you're kind of translating a flowchart that is very rough and rugged into like hardcore design once you move into building the onboarding wireframe. So this is, I guess the totally juiced up version of this is like a clickable prototype in Figma, but we're big fans of once you have the kind of designs dialed in, get to engineering and move to staging. Clickable prototypes are useful, but you're never going to release that stuff into the wild. So it's kind of an unnecessary step. And then you bring in engineering, and then, kind of it progresses through there. Anything to add there before we move into kind of macro commentary?
Yeah, I would add, depending on how much information customer success has from step one, you may have to include engineering from the beginning just to understand, hey, where are all of the usage stats located today for us to be able to make some assumptions and put the flow chart together. So I would say customer success and design is a great start, but just in case they don't have enough data to work off of, that's a perfect opportunity to involve engineering and just get their take on things.
For sure. And I think the thing there is, and Shape Up is kind of my Bible for, kind of how these teams coordinate and snap together. The big thing you're looking for is a big disconnect between level of technical difficulty among the design team and the engineering team. So they're like, oh yeah, just do this thing. And it's like, dude, that thing is like 2 hours worth, 200 hours worth of work. And it's like, oh,
Yep.
shit. So we need to refactor it. And so
that's a perfect collaboration point and decision point.
Totally. So you want enough people in the huddle to shape the work, and then you want to assembly line it in an iterative kind of agile way, which is what we're about to elaborate on. Great
Exactly.
inputs, Kaylu. God bless you. So this is a lot of text here, so I hesitate to keep the screen share rolling. But I think the most important prerequisite, right, if you're going to build a segment or a segment-based onboarding, is what, Kev?
The most important thing, if you're going to build a segment-based onboarding, the most important thing is essentially understanding what are the identifiers of that segment. How do you identify the people in that segment?
Exactly.
Firmographics, technographics, usage stats. Who are you and what makes you you?
Exactly. Well, who are your segments, right? So, so that's the work. You got to be like, and you probably start with a very general onboarding experience. This is going to achieve, ideally 60 to 80% or it's going to get on average, our 60 to 80% of our users are trying to achieve this general outcome in our software. Cool. Mm-hmm. Let's get them there. That's 1.0. Then 2.0. I think that's probably where we are, which is like, go through all this stuff and hopefully
let's just see what you're doing and where you end up.
Yeah. And hopefully you're so engaged and you believe in this so much that you're going to give us the time and energy to get there. Yep. The alternative is you define your segments. So this is a big exercise, so I don't want to gloss over it. I included a link here to really go deep if you want. I also included some intel on jobs to be done as a framework to because I think once you look at segments, and the most useful thing is to look at your install base, to look at your user base. And as Kevin mentioned, use firmographics. So how many employees, what do revenues look like, just kind of the characteristics that are very quantifiable and definable for your users, and then
Mhm.
figure out where the patterns are. And so I think the simplest thing is, or one way to start, if you're like, holy shit, I have no idea where to start, is just think about complexity. So what's the variance in complexity of your users? So you might have like a small, medium, large, and that's a good enough jumping off point. Like just t-shirt size it and go from there. And you can use some easy stuff like, again, revenues, employee count, stuff like that. The other thing is, I won't elaborate much beyond that. But the first thing is like, cool, these are the patterns in our users. Great. Now, what are the most important? And we've defined our segments now. What are the most important outcomes for each segment? And you can use that. The best way is to actually look at behavior in the product and say this segment which is undeniably a segment, a natural grouping of our users. They do the most of this thing in our product. Boom. There's
Mhm.
your most important outcome. And so you get to this place. Then let's say we've got 3 customer segments. We've got 5 mission critical important outcomes that our SaaS provides. That's a lot. That's probably much more than the average micro SaaS company. Um, and this is kind of how we're going to group this stuff. It's like, okay, cool. So from there, you've kind of established this foundation, right? To just think about users, to think about your market. The next question is, how do you triage new users into their appropriate segment? Right. So just think that you're like, cool, Skittles are coming in. We need a way to figure out what color the Skittles are, and then we're going to organize them in each pile. And this is usually a function of the onboarding experience. I'm sorry, not the onboarding experience. Let's be more specific, the account creation or the sign up process. So if you bought software in the past, recently, it's like, what's your role? How many employees do you have? What's your biggest priority? This is all a profiling exercise because they take that
Mhm.
data and then they push you into the exact path that is optimized for you to ideally get to the outcome or the job to be done that they've just identified as a function of the intel that you just gave them to help them segment you. Anything to add there, Caleb?
Only thing I would add is if you don't have a product where you can monitor usage today, it's always good to start with a survey. A
Yeah,
general survey
exactly.
out there of people who can potentially be your customers. Figure out, let's say we're talking about photographers. What are the review sites? What are the directories? Where are the social platforms that they're spending most of their time? Get into those communities, start talking to people, and start issuing surveys to kind of get some of that information. And that is a second good starting point if you don't have user stats to look at.
Yeah, beautiful. Very, very well said. And there's tons of stuff in like, God, what was Superhuman's thing? They use it to determine product market fit, but it's like, I guess their thing was like, if this went away tomorrow, would you leave? Like, if Superhuman went away tomorrow, would you leave? Or would you freak out? And it's like, yeah, if Superhuman went away tomorrow, I would freak out. They're like, cool, we got product market fit. The next step from that is like, if you couldn't do this in Superhuman, would you leave? So there's a ton of best practice out there around what those surveys look like. Cool. And I think what's really important is that there's a hardcore trade-off here. So I guess I'm going to try to think of a metaphor on the spot. Let's see how we do. Every question you ask makes the door tighter and harder for your users to get through. So
Mm.
like every question you ask introduces friction into that onboarding flow, which increases the likelihood that they don't make it in. And you want them, but at the same time, you don't want crapola making it in, right? So there's a
Right.
balance there. So just, Pareto principle 80-20 is very useful for that, where it's like, all right, these are the inputs we need. Like, is there a 20% of these inputs that's the most important that gives us 80% of the information we need? The other thing you can do is start with that and then slowly layer stuff on. And it's like, cool. When we had 3, account creation questions, we saw this conversion or we saw this completion rate. When we added 4, it reduced by 1%. When we added 5, it reduced by 5%. When we added 10, it reduced by 80%. It's like, okay,
Yep.
it's probably between 5 and 10, like we need to kind of pull this back a little bit. But the bottom line is you get clear on your segments as a function of who your users are now. You start to map that to what those most important outcomes are based on segment. And then you figure out how to ask questions during the account creation process to move new users into the appropriate segment. And then all of this is in service of teeing up a segment-based onboarding experience. I think that's
One thing to add there, I would say, is as you're testing, funneling these new leads into their appropriate segments, one thing that is an elite approach is A/B testing. If you think one form with 4 questions, let's say, for example, you can't decide whether we should go with 4 questions or 10 questions. You just can't get to the bottom of that Pareto principle, right? A/B test it. Do one with 4, one with 8. And this is also if you have like a very, let's say, mature, predictable lead flow. You've already figured out where to find your leads, how to capture them, how to bring them to your site. And you're generating, let's say, 100 plus signers per week. This is an awesome opportunity to A/B test, because then you can see, okay, for every 50 leads that go to the A form, 20 sign up. For every 50 leads that go to the B form, 10 sign up. That is an awesome opportunity to really see, okay, should we go with 4 versus 10 questions?
Absolutely. So scientific method always. We're in the lab, baby. Tinker with
That's
this
it.
and see what happens. Tinker with both things and see which does better. Yeah, and I think there was one. Okay, and in terms of like measurement, so North Star here is like on a segment basis. You want to get that segment to their most important outcome as soon as humanly possible, such that they perceive what is referred to often as like the aha moment, or like, okay, this is the brand promise. Simply put, they want to get value out of the product, and you want to get them there as fast as humanly possible. So we plan on measuring this based on completing the last onboarding step that's based on their respective segment, and we want to see a 75% completion rate, which is, again, a function of base rates back to completion rates that are elite. So 75% is very good. Sometimes this is referred to as activation as well. Anywho, and oh boy, I'm starting to lose my voice. A lot of phone time today, baby. I'm going to hang in there. All right, cool. So then we move into executing, engineering, iterative QA, and testing. And I think the most common pitfalls that I see is that you kind of leave your product management chops at the door. And so it's like, hey, yeah, we're going to like, it's like, don't do that. Like, this is product. What you're doing might as well be a sprint. Like, it might as well be a feature release. And if it's native to the product, for all intents and purposes, it's the same DNA as an engineering sprint, as a product sprint. So, you want to think about it. Cool. How do we take this onboarding experience and chunk it into little individual sprints, such that we can complete a sprint cohesively, which means design snaps together with engineering and it exists in staging, and you can look at it and click through it. You can maybe give it to some users and have them try it. And then you move on to the next one, because you might be like, oh shit, we found out this thing that was really weird. Now we can incorporate that knowledge when you move through it. So obviously you want to maintain kind of an agile methodology. You want to be highly iterative within that process. And then once you ship the new onboarding experience, it's not done. It is a dynamic, living, breathing thing. So you keep your scientific science hat. I need to come up with a cooler term for that. You stay in the lab, and it's like, cool, it's in the wild. What are we seeing? What's the data telling us? How do we course correct? What are the surveys telling us? Have we made it worse? Right? That's like kind of a catastrophic outcome. But you plan to iterate your way to the Holy Land.
Amen.
Anything to add to that?
I would give 2 shameless plugs. I would say, if you don't have a software like User Guiding, where it's, capturing some of those completed steps and you're seeing the analytics for it, the alternative is you want to plug all your usage stats into a tool like Mixpanel, so you can see from the beginning, how did they get to your website? When they filled out that sign-up form, what was that time or that value point, that value prop they're looking for, that outcome they're looking for? And during that trial period, you want to see that all the actions and activities they completed are directly tied back to that outcome they want. And you keep that up on a dashboard, and you're kind of just monitoring that, like, okay, we just got a cohort of users in this week. What exactly are they doing? And then you're just tracing every path through one of those Mixpanel reports.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think one distinction that we did not make that's huge is I think click-through rates for like in-app queues, which everybody, I guess, just to like, if the last time you bought software, it's like, hey, look at this thing. This is what this thing does. Click next. Look at this thing. This is what this thing does. Look at this thing. They're not very outcome-based, right? It's not like, here's this, do this. Cool, move you over here. Here's this, do this. Regardless of how outcome or action-oriented is, you're bouncing your user around, which doesn't necessarily convey simplicity and time to value. It's like, Jesus, I had to bounce through 12 tabs to, put together this outcome. This is kind of a disaster. So we're in the click-through rates of those in-app queues, we've noticed just as in structural decline, period. Because myself, I buy an app, the thing comes up and I'm like, delete.
Get me out of here.
Out of here immediately. Like, I don't want to be spun around in this app right now. I'm just going to figure it out on my own. So our hope is that, the best possible scenario is that you basically cobble together what is the smoothest path to each of these outcomes, and you tie it into a very simple, linear, cohesive product experience. And once they're done, they dump into the application and they're ready to roll. So that's what we mean with product native, which is a huge distinction. I'm sorry we haven't made it until this point, but our thesis is that product native is far superior to app queue driven, where and the truth is that app queues, onboarding, like what are the other ones? Are user guiding, Pendo, user. Anyway, anything that's there's a ton of them. Our suggestion too, or I think what's common as a methodology, is that is kind of a Band-Aid thing. Like you use that thing to figure out stuff, and then you address it with product. Like you actually make substantive changes to the product, because product is the growth engine, right? This is not a sales-led thing. We don't have humans implementing software. The product has to allow the user to onboard themselves, and you need to make that as smooth and brain dead as humanly possible.
Very well said. Very well said. In-app queues are simply just a way to collect data, validate your hypothesis, and then you let that influence your product roadmap.
Beautiful. So in closing, and I'll read this one right off the script, hopefully the above is useful. Godspeed on our mutual paths toward user onboarding nirvana. And you already know it's for the love of the game. Okay, Lou? Much love, buddy. I will see you next week. Signing off.
Signing off.
Peace.